Not verse 24, correct. Okay, now this is where Absalom has been killed, and there's a couple of guys that are running toward Jerusalem to bring tidings to David, and this is where we left off. One of them had passed up the other one, and here we begin reading in verse 24. And David sat between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate and to the wall, and lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold, a man running alone. The watchman cried and told the king, and the king said, If he be alone, there is tidings in his mouth. And he come apace, and drew near. And the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called unto the porter, and said, Behold, another man running alone. And the king said, He bringeth me tidings. And the watchman said, Methinketh the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. And the king said, He is a good man, and comes with good tidings. And Ahimaaz called and said unto the king, All is well. And he fell down to the earth upon his face before the king, and said, Blessed be the Lord thy God, which hast delivered up the men that lifted up their hand against my lord the king. Okay, we're going to stop right there. So here we have a setting to where David's waiting at the gates, and there's two towers, and you have watchmen that are on the towers, watching for messengers, also watching for an enemy that might come and invade their town. So David had the watchmen watching, and they see a Ahaz coming off in the distance. He had passed up the other young man named Cushai, and was coming along toward the castle. Now, it was a good thing, verse 25, that he passed up Cushai, because if they had been walking near each other, they would have thought they were spies. Okay, and this is what one commentary I had read said. But he come walking alone, and Cushai was still trying to catch up. So the watchman, this is one thing I thought was very interesting. The watchman yells down, it says here in verse 26, to the porters. Does your version say something else other than the watchman called unto the porter in verse 26?
Gatekeeper.
Gatekeeper, thank you. That's the one I was looking for. I found out something interesting, is that there's gates below these two towers. And there was gatekeepers that would open the gates when people would enter into the city. And as I was reading, did you know that in Solomon's temple, they had 4,000 gatekeepers? And that's in 1 Chronicles 23:5. 4,000 gatekeepers to open the doors. Those doors are huge. Remember, we talked about the veil of the curtain being so large that you had to have all these different priests pull it open and close. They had porters open doors. And I thought that was very interesting, that in God's temple, I would love to be a gatekeeper. You know what I mean? You know, I just love to be a gatekeeper in the house of the Lord. But the watchman recognizes that it's Ahaz. And I noticed something, he said something interesting here too that my mother has said about my brother. My brother's went on to be with the Lord, but her firstborn, his name was Robert, and she could tell a mile away by the way he walked who he was. You know? And she just said he had that certain gait about him. And they noticed this about Ahaz. As he was coming, they said, well, we know who he is. That's Ahaz. And he was also the son of the priest, the high priest Zadok. And he brings tidings. Now, what tidings does Ahaz bring? Is it good tidings? He says all is well, right? He says it's good tidings, but he says, Blessed be the Lord, which thy God has delivered up the men that had lifted up their hand against my Lord the king. Okay, so that's kind of it's a mixed blessing. That's why I put question marks on this. Good tidings. Here you have, we won the war, and we killed all your enemies. Well, remember what happened. Let's go to verse 29. And the king said, Is the young man Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, When Joab sent the king's servant and me, thy servant, I saw a great tumult, but I knew not what it was. And the king said unto him, Turn aside and stand here. And he turned aside and stood still. And behold, Cushai came. And Cushai said, Tidings, my lord the king, for the Lord hath avenged thee this day of all them that rose up against thee. And the king said to Cushai, Is the young man Absalom safe? And Cushai answered, The enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise up against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. And the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate, and wept. And as he went up, he said, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. All right. Here he is. David's won a victory. He's got messages coming. And what was his first concern?
His son.
His son. And what did Ahaz, what did he say to David? He said that I saw a tumult. The word tumult there is Haman in Hebrew, and it means a crowd rumbling. But he told him he didn't see the outcome of the death of Absalom. Of course, Joab was the one who killed him. But so here comes Cushai bringing news. What news did Cushai bring? He said that all your enemies have been killed. And then David asked again about his son. I don't think he wants to believe that his son's been killed. It's a hard thing. Cushai, being in the presence of the king, doesn't even want to say Absalom's name. Did you see that? He doesn't even say Absalom's name. He just says everyone was killed, or everyone is in the same boat as Absalom. But he didn't use his name. Everyone that wanted to bring harm to David has been eliminated. Now, how did David take that news? It says in verse 33, he was moved. And I liked it much better looking up that word moved. Does anybody have a different version other than the King James where it says moved? The king was much moved.
Well, the definition is violent emotion. It wasn't just a little bit. It was
Right, exactly. The word there is ragaz, and it means to quiver violent emotion. Yeah, that's exactly right. A violent emotion of quivering. Anybody ever cried like that before? I have. But it also can mean be afraid, stand in awe, fall out, quake and tremble. David was shook up. That's just all there is to it. And then it says he went to his chamber. That word chamber is aliyah, A-L-I-Y-Y-A. It means an upper room or a loft. It usually has a stairway leading up to it. It says here, he cried as he went up the stairs to his private room. And of course he cried out for his son. He also said, I wish I had died instead of him. It's funny when we have children that go astray, how much it hurts us, Okay, let's go down to verse, chapter 19. Victory turned to mourning. And it was told Joab, Behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say that day how the king grieved for his son. And the people got them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. And Joab came into the house to the king and said, Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, and the lives of thy sons and thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives, and the lives of thy concubines. In that day, in that thou lovest thine enemies and hatest thy friends. For thou hast declared this day, that thou regardest neither princes nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived, all we had died this day. Then it had pleased thee well. Now therefore arise and go and speak comfortably unto thy servants, for I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that will be worse unto thee than all the evil that has befallen thee from thy youth until now. Then the king arose and sat in the gate, and they told unto all the people, saying, Behold, the king doth sit in the gate. And all the people came before the king, for all Israel had fled, every man to his tent. I'm going to stop there. Now Joab, it says in verse 1, the chief leader of the armies of David were victorious over Absalom. But it's showed here that David is mourning the death of Absalom. You know, everybody was rejoicing in victory, and then they come and the king is distraught because they won. It says here the people mourned. They weren't mourning for Absalom, right? What do you think they were mourning for?
For the king.
They were mourning for the king, because the king was acting kind of in an unkingly manner, if you ask me. And also, they became afraid. They said, okay, he had told everybody not to kill Absalom. Now Absalom's been killed, and now we are the ones who killed him.
Yep.
So it says here that they kind of snuck out of the city because they were fearful of their lives. Instead of being, they came back from victory. Just think about this. They came back from victory, and instead of being victorious, they're treated with scorn. With scorn. When did that else happen? Here in the United States.
Vietnam War.
Vietnam War. We had the same thing happen where our politicians in our nation were against the boys coming over back from victory. Because it was not really a victory because of the way the politicians handled that war. It was an uncalled for war. Now, the king had covered his face like he was ashamed of the armies. And this made Joab pretty upset. Now, you remember Joab is a general over an army. He's a bloody man. He is a man of war. And he tells the king that you're bringing shame, and that word shame in Hebrew is yabesh. It means confound, dry up, and disappoint. He says, you're disappointing the servants that saved you. And he tells them how he disappointed them. In verse 6 it says, Joab's words were very blunt, they were very blunt and to the point. If Absalom had lived and defeated all of us and killing all of us, it would have made you happy, king. And then in verse 7 it says, Now therefore arise, go forth and speak comfortably unto all the servants. Now that's what it says in the King James Version. And I had to look up that word comfortably, because I wasn't sure how you speak comfortably to an army. But it says, the word is leb, L-E-B, and it means courageous, friendly, wisdom. Joab tells David that he had better go talk to the people in wisdom before you have a mass desertion on your hands. That's what he told him. He says, if you don't, every single person's going to leave, and you won't have a kingdom. So David, he does heed the advice, and he goes to sit in the gates to meet the people. Now notice also in verse 8 it says two different kinds of people. He says, all the people saying, all the people came before the king, for all Israel had fled every man to his tent. So the people of Israel, remember we got Israel and Judah, there was civil war. So you got the Israelites who had fought for David, and they were the ones that were hiding, but now they're coming out of hiding because he calls them. And they're actually telling him, well, that's not, I hadn't got there yet. Let's look at verse 9, where the kingdom is restored. And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king saved us out of the hands of our enemies, and he delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines, and now he has fled out of the hand of Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore why speak ye not a word, bringing the king back? And King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, saying, Speak unto the elders of Judah, saying, Why are ye the last to bring the king back to his house, seeing the speech of all Israel is come to the king, even to his house? Ye are my brethren, ye are my bones, my flesh. Wherefore are ye the last to bring back the king? And say ye to Amasa, Art thou not my bone of my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. And he bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, even as the heart of one man. So they that sent his word unto the king, Return thou all thy servants. So the king returned and came to Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to go to meet the king, to conduct the king over Jordan. Okay, Joyce, would you pass out this? I didn't give it to you, did I? It helps if I give it to you. All right. Let's go back. Now, it says all the people, verse 9, it says all the people were at strife. And David's nation had become very, very disorganized. Kind of like our kingdom. It's all disorganized. Their rebellious leader was dead. Now what do? He's telling them, are you going to return as king or not? And verse 10, who anointed Absalom? Do y'all notice that? Somebody anointed Absalom a king. The Israelites did. You know, they're kind of crazy. You know, they had judges and they wanted a king, so they cry out to God for a king, they give him Saul. Saul's not good enough, so they get David. David's not good enough, so they get Absalom. Sounds like our nation.
But we have to make those decisions every 4 years.
Yeah, we do, don't we? Okay, so the people anointed Absalom. God anointed David. That's one thing, big difference between David and any other king that ever walked this earth, that God anointed David to be king. And David sent the high priest to the elders. And I like that word elders there. The word elders in Hebrew is zagin. And zagin means a senator, and it can mean an aged woman or an aged man. So he goes to the council, the high council, the elderly, and more politics. If anyone can convince the king to come back, you, the priest, can make them come back. Now you got to realize that in their government, the priests were the government.
Yeah.
Okay? That's part of their government, and it still is in the Middle East. You see over there, all those countries are ruled by religious people, and some to our detriment because they're evil gods they're following after, some of them. And that's one of the reasons we don't have a religion as the center of our government. I mean, it would work if everybody was Christian, or everybody was Muslim,
No.
but we're not.
Exactly.
And the word of the death of Absalom came to David, and David's victory was spreading throughout all the kingdom. The government of Jerusalem had been restored. And David sends a messenger by way of the priest, basically saying that you were bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, right? So they had bloodlines. Now Amasa says in verse 13, Say to Amasa, Art thou not my bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh? Amasa is David's nephew, okay? So if you're trying to keep up with who all these people are, and his name means a burden. He was the son of Ithra. Ithra was an Israelite, and Abigail, daughter of Nahash, sister of Joab's mother. Amasa had also led the armies of Absalom, and David offered him the place as general over the armies in lieu of Joab. Now this is interesting. So Amasa used to work for Absalom, and now David's making him the chief ruler over his armies. Now this is pretty much a wise move on David's part. You know why? Because the people were following Absalom, they had been following Amasa, so now the people were following Amasa because their leader was dead, and Amasa is now chief leader underneath David. So that's alliances, that's political alliances. So they end up, they're restored and uniting Judah and Israel together through Manasseh. And, okay, let me make sure I don't get too far ahead. Yeah, so David and his army begin their trek back to Jerusalem. Arriving at the River Jordan, the men arrived at a place called Gilgal. And I handed out a handout. Now, Gilgal is a famous gathering place. We had read one place there was a ferry there to go across the river, and I went ahead and looked up some things here, and I got these out of my topical Bible, my name's topical Bible. That Gilgal is a very important place. The word means a wheel or a whirlwind or a hub. Okay. This was the first place where the encampment of Israel is west of the River Jordan, and there's several scriptures there. Joshua 4:19, Joshua 9:6. They're all on here. Joshua 10:6, Joshua 10:43, and Joshua 14:6. There's a monument erected to commemorate the passage over the Jordan River by the people of Israel. That's where they were circumcised was renewed. The Passover was kept there. That's where the manna ceased after the Passover. See, this is an important place. There was a quarry there where they dug stone. King Moab was slain there. There was a judgment seat there. Saul was proclaimed king over all Israel in Gilgal. There was an altar built there, and sacrifices were offered. Agag, king of the Amalekites, was slain by Samuel there. That was an interesting story too. We read that when we studied 1 Samuel, of Samuel taking the priest taking his sword and killing someone, justifiably, of course. Now the tribe of Judah assembles at and proceeds to the east of the Jordan River to conduct King David's back after the defeat of Absalom. That's where we're at right now. There was a school of prophets there, and there were several prophecies concerning Gilgal mentioned in the prophets. In Hosea 4:15, 9:15, Hosea 12:11, Amos 4:4, and Amos 5:5. And a royal city in Canaan that was conquered by Joshua 12:23. Y'all look at those prophecies. Y'all got the handout where it says prophecies concerning? There's 5 of them. Can y'all look some of those up for me? Hosea 4:15, Hosea 9:15, Hosea 12:11, Amos 4:4, and Amos 4:5. Who's got that? Hosea 4:15, Hosea 9:15.
Hosea 4:15. Though you, Israel, play the harlot, let not Judah offend. Do not come up to Gilgal, nor go up to Beth Aven, nor swear an oath, saying, as the Lord lives.
All right, let's see. How about Hosea 9:15?
All their wickedness is in Gilgal, for there I hate them. For the wickedness of their doings, I will drive them out of mine house. I will love them no more. All their princes are revolters.
Ouch. How about 12:11? Hosea 12:11.
Is there any iniquity in Gilmed?
Yeah.
Surely they are vanity. They sacrifice bullocks in Gilgal. Yea, their altars are as heaps in the furrows of the fields.
All right, now we're getting a picture. How about Amos 4:4 and 5?
Amos 4:4. come to Bethel and transgress, and Gilgal multiply transgressions. Bring your sacrifices every morning, your tithes every 3 days.
And 5:5. Amos 5:5.
But do not seek Bethel, nor enter Gilgal, nor pass over to Beersheba. For Gilgal shall surely go into captivity, and Bethel shall come to nothing.
Wow. Now, remember that Gilgal was the gateway outside of Jerusalem into the Philistine area. So today we have something very similar there when we find the Gaza Strip. We have the division of southern Lebanon and Israel. But God says that this place of worship outside of the New Jerusalem, outside of the Jerusalem, and I believe this is a prophecy about people going outside of God's grace. There's a time when we stop the sacrifices, and if people continue to sacrifice, we're not going by God's will.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? And I think that we can spiritually find that in our churches today, that people continue to do sacrifices to try to atone themselves. You know? Yes, it is called works, and we cannot atone ourselves. Christ has done it all once and for all. There's only one sacrifice, and it's already been done.
Right.
And that it's done once and for all. That's what book of Hebrews says. Okay, I have come to the conclusion of this part of the lesson. Next week we're going to start chapter 19, verse 16. And we get to see, next week we get to listen about Shimei. Remember Shimei was the one that was cursing David earlier, and we get to see what happens to him. So, God bless.